This is not just a story. This is an autopsy of human illusions, one of the darkest case studies in female nature ever recorded. A tale that begins with a flash of electric blue and ends with the silent, invisible execution of an entire future. We are not in history. We are walking into the slaughterhouse of certainty itself. Into the place on earth where time was stabbed through the heart. Where tomorrow ceased to exist. Where the elegant fictions of civilization burned away, and what stood naked beneath was raw, brutal instinct. The date, April 26, 1986. The place, Pripyat, Ukraine. A city built as a poster child for Soviet triumph, a concrete paradise rising out of the marshes. Wide boulevards, pristine apartment blocks, Lenin watching from the plazas as children laughed in his shadow. Young men in crisp uniforms, engineers in spotless helmets, party officials with the stiff posture of true believers. The women admired them, providers, protectors, men with secure jobs and powerful titles. The future seemed welded in steel, predictable, bright, guaranteed. On the surface, it was paradise. But paradise is always one heartbeat away from the jungle. The first warning wasn't a sound. It was a light, a vertical spear of electric blue fire screaming into the heavens from Reactor 4. A sight too beautiful to be anything but deadly. Seconds later, the shockwave came, a blunt, physical punch that broke windows kilometers away. The air changed. A metallic, alien smell crept over the city. This was the moment the future was erased. Radiation, odorless, invisible, merciless, spread like a ghost army across the city. Death itself was now airborne, but silent. And the authorities? They knew. The Soviet machine understood perfectly what was happening. The men in suits, the ones whose words shaped reality itself, decided the truth was inconvenient. So, they smothered it. Children played in radioactive dust glowing faintly under the streetlights. Couples stood on balconies, holding hands, watching the ominous glow on the horizon like it was fireworks, while their internal organs quietly cooked. For 36 hours, they told the people nothing. Because control was worth more than lives. Now picture yourself as Alexei, 32 years old, turbine engineer. You were on shift. You felt the building convulse, heard the screams, saw men vomiting in the corridors. You come home at dawn. Your wife, Lisa, sees your pale skin, the tremor in your hands, the fear leaking from the corners of your eyes. But the loudspeakers outside play cheerful music. The party says it was just a minor electrical fire. Everything is contained. And for the first time in her life, Lisa does not believe them. Worse, she does not believe you. Because you, the provider, the strong man she built her world upon, look like a frightened child pretending to be brave. The first crack appears, not in the walls of your apartment, but in the walls of your marriage. The evacuation, when it came, was clinical, heartless, too late. Only 3 days, they told them. Pack for 3 days. They never came back. As the buses pulled away, women stared at the receding skyline, their homes, possessions, photo albums, their lives, vanishing under a pillar of black smoke. Their status, their routines, their future, all ash. And here, in this biological 0 hour, something ancient awoke. The polite illusions of socialism, of marriage, of romance itself began to disintegrate. Because under extreme conditions, the female psyche recalculates. Civilization had said, choose the man with the degree, the career, the apartment, the future. But the future no longer existed. Now the calculation was savage, stripped to the bone, choose the man who survives. Hypergamy, the quiet engine always humming beneath female choice, shifted gears. In normal times, it hunts status, resources, strength wrapped in social approval. But in chaos, it hunts survival itself. The Soviet state inadvertently created a new hierarchy. At the bottom, the doomed, the irradiated, the walking dead, men glowing with a half-life they couldn't feel. In the middle, conscripted soldiers, sent to shovel lethal graphite off rooftops in 90-second suicide missions. Disposable males in an empire of lies. At the top, the physicists, the radiation experts, the men with knowledge, Geiger counters, access to clean food and secret information. Men who understood this invisible hell. To the female brain under stress, they were no longer just men. They were lifeboats. Alexei, the loyal husband, rotted in a Moscow hospital bed, skin peeling, hair falling out in clumps, the smell of radiation burn seeping from his pores. He represented the old world, the failed world. Victor, the health physicist, represented oxygen, water, future. And evolution does not care about wedding vows. Again and again, in testimonies and archives, the pattern appears. Wives visiting husbands wrapped like mummies in lead-lined wards, doctors warning them, don't touch him. Don't stay too long. Wash everything you bring. Love fought biology. Biology won. There is a case, they still whisper about it, of Igor, a firefighter. First on the scene. Lethal dose. His wife, Natalia, arrived in Moscow, holding on to hope like a drowning woman clutches driftwood. For a week, she read to him, wiped his fevered skin, kissed his trembling hands. By week 3, she stopped coming every day. By week 5, she stopped coming at all. Because there are truths polite society cannot bear to say aloud. When the future dies, so does monogamy. When survival is currency, yesterday's love becomes today's liability. And in the shadows of Chernobyl, instinct, not ideology, not marriage vows, not romance, instinct alone decided who lived, who died, and who was replaced. The story doesn't end with Igor's silence in that Moscow hospital. Because what Chernobyl exposed wasn't just the fragility of concrete and steel. It stripped the flesh off the illusions we call love, loyalty, and forever. When the future vanished, the female brain recalibrated with mechanical precision. Evolution does not ask. It does not apologize. It simply rewrites the rules. Within weeks, Pripyat's wives were no longer wives. The state evacuated them into sanitized apartment blocks hundreds of kilometers away, packed with soldiers, scientists, party officials, and liquidators rotating through assignments. It was chaos disguised as order, a crumbling empire whispering lies about temporary resettlement, while quietly preparing mass graves. Here is the truth polite historians choke on. In those relocation centers, status mutated overnight. The engineers, the men who once built nuclear reactors and quoted Lenin at dinner parties, were now pariahs if they had been exposed. They coughed blood into handkerchiefs, their fingernails falling off in the sink. The women saw it. Smelled it. Instinct recorded it in a language older than marriage vows. This man is death. Meanwhile, the physicists, those thin, pale men with Geiger counters and access to food shipments from Moscow, became the new alphas. Why? Because they had the one thing worth more than love, more than ideology, more than diamonds or dachas: information. They knew which wells were poisoned, which streets were hot zones, which hospitals were actually morgues in disguise. And in a collapsing world, knowledge is oxygen. The testimonies become darker here. Women trading favors for iodine tablets. Soldiers bribing for clean water with jewelry stripped from evacuated apartments. A whispered network of survival blooming in the shadow of a reactor still burning with the fury of a small sun. One witness, her name buried in archives, spoke of a physicist she met while her husband lay dying in hospital number 6. He knew where the food was safe, she said decades later, voice trembling. He knew how far the winds would carry the poison. When he spoke, the room listened. My husband only cried. Do you understand the shift? The man who once represented stability now represented weakness, helplessness, the past. The man with the dosimeter represented tomorrow. And female nature does not worship the past. It kneels before the future, whoever owns it. By midsummer, Soviet commanders quietly noticed rising tensions in the relocation camps. Soldiers fighting over women. Civilians accusing officers of hoarding supplies. Marriages dissolving in real time as if sliced by an invisible knife. But it wasn't the knife of radiation. It was the knife of biology. Hypergamy under normal conditions wears the mask of romance. It hides behind church bells, wedding rings, anniversary toasts. It plays by the rules because the rules benefit it. But Chernobyl annihilated the rules. When death drifts in the air like pollen, when every meal could be your last, when the man you married is vomiting blood while another man holds the map to survival, loyalty dies first. One liquidator remembered returning from a 3-week assignment clearing the reactor roof, a walking corpse with burned lungs and a purple rash spreading under his skin, only to find his wife pregnant by a military officer stationed at the same camp. He confronted her. She stared at him with the cold eyes of someone looking at a ghost. Because that's what he was. A dead man speaking. Do you see it yet? Chernobyl wasn't just a reactor explosion. It was a laboratory where civilization's mask slipped, and what crawled out was older than morality, older than love, older than words. The female instinct, stripped of Soviet propaganda, fairy tales, and polite illusions, did exactly what it has done for 200,000 years. It calculated. It adapted. It survived. And when the ash settled, when the reactor was finally entombed in its sarcophagus of concrete and lies, when the party assured everyone that life was returning to normal, the truth was already carved into the lives it left behind. The women rebuilt their futures with the men who owned the future. The dying were mourned. The living were replaced. Chernobyl didn't create this instinct. It simply burned away everything that used to hide it. When the last fires at the reactor finally died, the world thought the story was over. But Chernobyl didn't end when the helicopters stopped dropping sand and boron into the open reactor core. It didn't end when the radiation maps were locked away in steel drawers. It didn't even end when the party declared everything contained, while secretly evacuating entire villages under the cover of night. Because the real fallout was not in the soil. It was in people. Entire families scattered across the Soviet Union like radioactive ash, carrying invisible grief, invisible fear, invisible mutations in their blood. Some carried children in their wombs whose fathers were already dead or dying. Others carried secrets, the kind whispered only once in a lifetime, then buried forever. This is where the story turned surgical. Because when you slice away the propaganda, the marriage vows, the tearful goodbyes, what you find underneath is biological math. Consider this: in the year after the disaster, while men were still scraping radioactive graphite off the rooftops with their bare hands, birth rates in some resettlement zones rose, not fell. Marriages collapsed at record speed, yet pregnancies spiked among women who had lost their husbands to radiation sickness. How? Because instinct doesn't care about funerals. Women who weeks earlier were weeping over dying husbands were now forming new bonds, fast, silent, pragmatic bonds, with men who held access to food, medicine, and information. Soldiers, officers, scientists. Men who controlled resources in a world where resources were now life itself. The Soviet archives are filled with dry, bureaucratic language, marital dissolution, domestic conflicts, informal cohabitations. But strip away the wording, and you see the pattern: the women adapted. The men died. Hypergamy had simply changed uniforms, from engineers and party loyalists to soldiers and physicists. The instinct didn't vanish, it evolved overnight, with predatory precision, hunting survival like a heat-seeking missile. And it left psychological craters deeper than Reactor 4. There are letters, hidden for decades, written by men in hospital wards to wives who had already moved on. Some begged forgiveness. Others cursed them with shaking, irradiated hands. One reads, "They tell me you have gone to live with Captain Antonov. I understand. He will live. I will not. Take care of Masha. Tell her her father was a fireman." No anger. No blame. Just the quiet surrender of a man who realized biology had written him out of the future. Because here is the truth no one wants to face. Chernobyl didn't create this instinct. It revealed it. It tore the thin wallpaper of civilization off the concrete wall of evolution, and what stood there was cold, efficient, merciless. The party tried to patch it back together. They built new apartments. They printed happy photographs of resettled families smiling in front of playgrounds that glowed at night with invisible death. They handed out medals to widows as if shiny tin could plug the holes in their lives. But the truth kept leaking, like radiation through lead. That disaster didn't just poison the land. It rewired relationships. It changed who was desirable, who was abandoned, who got to pass their genes forward. It changed the future itself. Even decades later, researchers found strange demographic footprints, surges of children born to mothers who had lost husbands in 1986, divorce records spiking across evacuation zones, marriage certificates issued to widows less than 6 months after funerals. Civilization wanted to forget. But evolution keeps records. And they tell the same story: when death walks the streets. When the air itself becomes a weapon, when the man you love starts coughing blood while another man controls the Geiger counter, loyalty dies. Instinct takes the throne. The future belongs to the survivors.